a lot of my ministry was as a youth pastor, and there was a time when I thought that's all I'd ever be as a youth pastor. I didn't want to be a lead pastor. I didn't want to be in this position. I didn't want to be speaking to adults because I sat in adult church before and it's boring, and I was like, I'm just going to be a youth pastor. And I've never lost that heart for youth and for teenagers. So that even makes it even more special with what happened here on the stage and them leading us in worship. But how many of you guys were in a youth group at some point growing up? Anybody? Some of you? Several? How many of you that were in a youth group, that made a huge impact on your life? All right. Some of you might be, a negative one. We're going to pretend it's all good, all positive. So I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for during my teenage years, the church I was going to, for them to make the decision to hire a youth pastor. And actually there was a couple of youth pastors as a teenager. Now, me, I was growing up in church. I was forced to go to church. My grandfather was a pastor. And I'll just say this, I did not like church at all. I don't think it's over the top to say I pretty much hated it. But my parents made me go. And then the church, they hired a youth pastor, and his name was Brett Watson. And I'm just going to put this out here. I'm sorry, Brett, if you're watching this. I wasn't a big fan. I'm just saying, I wasn't a big fan. He stayed for about a year. And then they hired another youth pastor named Garen. And Garen went out of his way to get to know me. And I was like, man, there's just something different about this. And I started just being drawn into the youth group and getting close. And stage fright, how you guys are close reminds me a lot of growing up in the youth group. And definitely one of the best times of my life. And then and it made me want to become a youth pastor because I wanted to make that impact in teenagers' lives like Aaron made in mine. So I became a youth pastor at the age of 19 years old. And that's around the time that Brett Watson came back into my life. Now, I was not a big fan of him as a youth pastor. Probably wasn't supposed to be a youth pastor, but as an evangelist and as a preacher, he was absolutely amazing. Now, I don't know about you. I grew up in church. We were in a Pentecostal church. Now, I know what you're thinking. We didn't have the rattlesnakes and stuff, all right? But there was this thing called, if you grew up in a Pentecostal church, you may know this saying. It's when you could read your mail. Anybody ever heard that phrase, read your mail? So what that means is, like, if you were somewhere like at a Golden Corral and someone just walked up to you, and now here's the thing, a lot would do stuff like this. L-Dog, I feel like God's telling me when you go to sleep, you use a pillow. Is that correct? Yeah, oh man. They would use like really vague things. Like, was your mom a woman? Yeah. Okay. All right, yeah, we're going somewhere. But Brett was different. Brett, I remember being at a Subway and Brett going up to this lady and just being like, is your grandma Gloria? And then just like going in, and I remember just this girl like just crying and weeping, and he led her to Jesus, and it was just a cool moment as a young preacher. And he had a revival at the church that I was the youth pastor at, and seeing people get prayed for and people get healed, it was just really cool. And I remember going to Brett and saying, Brett, because him and his wife, they had like an RV that they traveled around in, and I said, how about you get a bigger bus and let me travel around with you. I just want to be near what's going on. I want to be close to that. And I remember Brett saying to me, he's like, no, Jimmy, that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be here for these teenagers. You're supposed to be here for this church. You're not supposed to go with me. The reason I tell you that story is because the story that we're going to look at today, I can relate to. Because in this story, Jesus has been performing miracles. He's been speaking. In fact, he just got done preaching the Sermon on the Mount. And there's a buzz about Jesus. Crowds are coming. People are pressing in. In fact, when he got done with that sermon, this man came up to him who was a leper. Now, I don't know if you know much about lepers, but any lepers here today? No, okay. So back in that day, if you were a leper, you weren't supposed to be around people. So right away, this guy was breaking the law. Now, Jesus approached him, and the guy went to Jesus and said, "Will you heal me? Will you touch me? Will you make me clean?" And the Bible says Jesus was filled with so much compassion that he reached out and he healed this man. It's the first time I can find where Jesus touches and prays for a leper. And then a little bit later in Matthew chapter 8, this Roman officer comes up to Jesus. He says, "I got a worker back home. He's paralyzed. He can't move. He's too heavy to bring. But can you pray for him?" And Jesus said, "Yeah, let's go right now. Let's go to your house. I'll pray for him." The guy goes, No, there's no need. I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. If you will just pray right now, right where you're at, I know that he'll be healed. The Bible says Jesus was so amazed with his faith. But when I'm reading this, I'm thinking, that's weird that he was like, I'm unworthy for you to come to my house. Just like Jesus went to a lot of people's houses. But see, this guy was a Roman official. So, in my mind, this is what's going on. Two things. One of two things. Maybe both. He's thinking, I work for Rome. And if they see me with this guy that's a little questionable, this Jewish man, and I'm bringing him into my house, I am looking to come up with a plan to take over Rome, or to throw Caesar out of position. And I'm not only going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my life. That may have been what's going on. Or, now back in that time, the Jewish people, they were very big on, if you weren't Jewish, that you were unclean. And maybe this Roman officer, he felt like he was unclean, but either way, he said, Jesus, if you'll just pray right then. And Jesus did, and his worker was healed. A little bit later on in the same chapter, they get to Capernaum, and Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, he says, "Hey, y'all, you can stay with us. You can stay with me." And they go there. Now, Peter was a little bit out of line, like he was talking a little out, because it wasn't his house. It was his mother-in-law's house. All right? But they get there, and Peter's like, "Boys, you just wait. My mother-in-law cooks the best meatloaf. Man, and cheesecake is going to, just wait, come on." They're like, "Peter, are you sure she's going to be okay with all of us staying with?" "Yeah, man, yeah, come on, she's going to love it." They get there, and here's the thing. Peter's mother-in-law was sick. She had a fever. And I'm not talking, Joanna, I'm not talking about like one of those fevers like 99.1 and you're like calling Miss Ann to come take care of you. I'm not talking about that. This is like 104 type fever. And Jesus goes in, he lays his hands on her and prays for her, and she is healed. Now, this just amazes me. You're going to love this part, Brian. You just get ready. Peter's mother-in-law was sick in bed. She couldn't even get up. Jesus prays for her. She's healed. The Bible says she got up right away and started cooking and started making food for Jesus and the disciples. Now, listen, I'm not saying every mother-in-law should do this, but Mom, if you're taking notes right here, Stacy, if after service you hear me scream, just call 911. My mom got a hold of me. So all of this stuff is going on. Like Jesus is becoming a big deal. Like really cool stuff is happening and people want to be around that and they're drawn to that. And he has all these people following him. He didn't just have the 12 disciples. He had all these people following him. And that's where we get to Matthew chapter 8, verse 18 and 22. And we're going to throw it up here on the Sky Bible. If you have your Bible, you can turn to it, or you can go to the Bible app, or you can just look up here on the Sky Bible. But it says, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Anybody else find that kind of weird? That's a weird thing to say after someone's like, "Hey, I want to follow you." And Jesus is pretty much going, "I'm homeless." Check this out. This guy, the Bible says this guy was a teacher of the law. That means that he already went through school. He made it all the way through school. He served under a rabbi. And now he sees Jesus, and he's used to this certain type of living. And Jesus is saying, what you were used to, your comfort level, where you were at, you're not going to have that following me. I just want to make you aware the expectations you have. It's not going to happen like that. He's making him aware of that. And then verse 21, it says, another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." I mean, kind of rude, right? I mean, anybody else it's like, whoa, Jesus is savage. But here's the thing. That was a saying that they used back then. Let me bury my father. Most likely, his dad had not passed away yet. So what this man is saying is, let me hang out here for a little bit until my dad dies. I can collect his inheritance, and then I'm right with you, Jesus. If I leave right now, my brothers are going to get my inheritance, so I'm going to hang out a little bit in Capernaum. But as soon as my dad dies, boom, I'm there, Jesus. I'll call you. Got your number. And Jesus is like, yeah, no. And what he's saying when he's talking in spiritual terms, when he says, let the dead bury the dead, he's saying, let those that aren't living in purpose take care of other people not living in purpose. But what we have going on right now is a huge deal, and we are living in purpose, and we are doing this thing, and if you want to be a part of it, you need to get on board right now. There is no hesitation. Let's go. So the title of my message, I'm going to take from the verse 20. Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." The title of my message is Jesus Was Homeless. And I think this is really cool because we talk about Jesus coming for those that are less than, or coming for the marginalized, or coming for the outcast. But here we find Jesus didn't just come for those people, but he walked with those people. He didn't say, "Here's me in my big nice house, and I'll come down there every once in a while and I'll give you a handout." No, he said, "I'm right here with you." And this is what I love about Fairlawn. I'm going to say this 100%. If it wasn't for the homeless ministry at Fairlawn, I would not be here. And I don't believe Pastor Mark would have been here. Would be here. See, when everything went down and Pastor Mike got a hold of us and came in, and we were thinking about it. Pastor Mark first, he preached one Sunday, and then he's like, "Man, it was awesome. I couldn't believe it." Like at the end of second service, when I got done speaking, like people stood up and gave me a standing ovation, and I was like, "Okay, sure. Like, I heard your messages, Mark. And you're trying to fool, but." So I came the following Sunday, end of second service. I got done. The congregation stood and gave a standing ovation. I still remember. I remember Thomas sitting over there and him being the first one that stood up and people just following that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe Mark wasn't lying to me. And then I was thinking, that standing ovation I got had to be louder than the one he got. And then finding out that about the Bridge Club and the homeless ministry here, and I thought it was just amazing because I felt like the Bridge Club set the tone here, and we've had people come in. I've had friends come and visit, and they said this. I've been to a lot of churches that have homeless ministries. This is where Fairlawn's different. Now, the other churches I've gone to, they have a section where the homeless sit over here and everybody else sits over here. And he says, but at Fairlawn, everybody sits together. Yes. It's just family. Yes. Yes. And it's just, it's an amazing thing to see. Now, I love when I go to like pastor meetings or stuff, and I don't go to them often, but every now and then Pastor Mark will drag me to them. And go there, and what's said a lot is commented a lot about the homeless ministry that we have here at Fairlawn. And gives you a little bit of pride. It's like, yeah, that's what we're doing. Yeah, that's what we're doing. But you know, God has his way of humbling you. So, I don't know how exactly it happened, but I came across this dude named Shane Claiborne and his videos. I ended up getting his book, and then I just kind of did a deep dive into his YouTube videos. And I say, this guy is at a different level. This guy is a wild man. And he lives in Philadelphia, which, if you know anything about Philadelphia, they call it the city of brotherly love, which they're still learning how to do that. And in Philadelphia, a few years ago, they started passing, and they're going all over the United States, they're passing these laws, but in Philadelphia, it was really bad. They started passing these anti-homeless laws. And they made it where it was illegal to sleep in public. If you were caught sleeping in public, they could just arrest you. Then they made it illegal to give food to the homeless. And if you were caught feeding the homeless, you could be arrested. Now, Shane's church, they had a huge homeless ministry. That was their main calling. They felt like that was their main purpose. And he got the staff together, and they're like, what are we going to do? And Shane says, well, I know that Jesus says, when I was hungry, did you feed me? So he said, regardless what the city tells us we can and can't do, if they're hungry, we're going to feed them. Right. So they did a weekly service, and he said the next time it was time for the service, they took their guitars, they took everything, they went down to the regular spot. But this time it was a little different because this time it was surrounded by police. And they played some worship, they gave a short devotional, and then they had communion. And they weren't sure. They were like, well, technically this is like giving food, so what are they going to do? And he said, I remember hearing the police look at each other and say, I'm not arresting them for communion. I'm not going to arrest them for communion either. He said even two officers even had communion with them. But then they said, we're going to continue to break bread with our fellow brothers and sisters. Instead of using wafers this time, we are going to use pizza. And they brought in pizza. And they were arrested. And Shane, telling the story, he said, my mom was so mad. And they went on trial. And Shane talks about this, and he said that he wore this shirt very much. I don't know if you can read it. It says Jesus was homeless. He wore a shirt like this that said Jesus was homeless. And as they walked in before the trial started, the judge came in and he said, sir, what does your shirt say? And he had him approach the bench, and he said, Jesus was homeless? I didn't know that. And Shane said, yes, sir, Your Honor. Jesus said foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And the judge said, I kind of like your chances. Throughout that trial, and he tells an in-depth story about that. I'm not going to go into all of that, but the judge ends up dropping all the charges and lets them go. And as they were leaving the courthouse, he called for Shane. He said, hey, can you get me one of those T-shirts? So they got him one of the T-shirts. The next thing that the city of Philadelphia did is they made the decision to shut down all the homeless shelters in the city. Now, I didn't know this, but the fastest growing homeless population then and now is single mothers and their children. And they just shut down, Philadelphia just shut down all the shelters. And they do have public housing, but there's a 10-year wait for a place in the public housing. Shane called his staff together, and they were praying, and he remembers praying, God, you got to do something. And then he said he felt like the Lord told him, I did. I created you. And he says, no, sometimes when you ask for God to move a mountain, he hands you a shovel. And he started thinking, he said, you know what? We have service here on Sunday mornings at our church, and we have service on Wednesday night. All the other days and nights out of the week, it's empty. So he said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to start opening up the church, and we can put about 100 people. We can house about 100 people in our church. And on days we're not having service, we're just going to invite them here, and they can bring their sleeping bags, they can bring whatever, and they can sleep here in the sanctuary. The city of Philadelphia found out about that. And they came up and they said, you are not registered as a shelter. Which I would have thought, yeah, no kidding. You shut all the shelters down. They said, this is an illegal shelter. Said, you have 48 hours to get everybody out of here, or we're going to shut this entire place down for church and everything. 48 hours. Shane got his staff together and said, let's pray. And then Shane got this idea. And he went to the city commissioners and he says, you know what? I respect your laws and we're going to obey your laws. You're right. We can't operate as a shelter. We don't have all of the things that we need for the facility for a shelter. But here's the thing. Our church, well, we're Pentecostal, and I don't know if you know about Pentecostals, but we like having revivals. You might not know what revivals is, but that's when we have somebody come, and we just have service every night. And this is what we're doing starting tonight. We're going to have revival. And it's going to start at 8 o'clock tonight, and it's going to end at 9:30 the next morning. And it's going to start tonight, but we have no time. We don't know when it's going to end. So they came in the first service. In the first service, they had all these news crews, and they were recording it because they didn't know what was going to happen. And Shane gets up on stage at 8 o'clock and says, this is going to be the start of our service. So we're going to sing a worship song. I'm going to get up and I'm going to give a devotional. And after they did that, he said, from this time, and he said it was about 9 o'clock, and he said from right now until the end of this service, which is 9:30 the next morning, is going to be a time of meditation. And he says everybody meditates a little different, and we're going to invite, if you have a mat, if you have a sleeping bag, if you have anything, just you can lay out before the Lord, and however you want to, and you may make some noises out there, which, Patty, we know that's snoring, right? Yeah, because there's some people in Fairlawn that does that. I know when Pastor Mark speaks. And says we're going to put on some light worship music and play it up, and we just want you to take from now until 9:30 tomorrow morning and just meditate. And please, everybody, please don't mess with anybody else while they're meditating, because we don't want to interrupt this special time they have. The city got ticked off, and they were so mad. But here's the thing, they couldn't do one thing about it. It's been about 11, 12 years now, and that revival is still going on. I mean, that's some craziness. That's like wild stuff. This thing, Shane Claiborne, when he was a teenager, he went out and he did ministry with Mother Teresa. And he said every morning Mother Teresa would get up and say the same prayer. And it would be, Jesus, may every person I come in contact with feel your presence. And may I leave your fragrance everywhere I go. And I don't know about you, but I believe that we are called to give off the fragrance of Jesus' love everywhere we go. Now here's the funny thing. Here's the funny thing, Ocean. You're going to love this. It's going to be great. You're going to love this. I did chapel on Wednesday. I went to one of these churches. I did a chapel with a bunch of kids. And I shared this part of this message. I didn't share the whole thing. I shared this part. And one of the kids said, it's kind of like we're supposed to be the air freshener in the bathroom. And I said, I love that analogy. I'm going to use it on Sunday. But Bear Research Group, they did this poll. They took 18 to 30-year-olds, non-Christians. They didn't go to church anywhere. And they said, what do you think of when somebody says the word Christian or somebody says the word church? And they gave the list of what they said. And I'm not going to go into that list, but I'm going to say this. It wasn't good. And it was a list of things that they felt like the church or felt like Christians are against. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, man, it's a shame that so often we're more known for the things that we're against than the things that we're for. And then it broke my heart because not one of them, not one person that they surveyed said the Christian or the church is known for their love. That wasn't mentioned anywhere. In John 13:35, it says, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Which makes me think, how many times, because I know I've dropped the ball so many times of not showing that love because I'm in a bad mood, because Julie didn't listen to me, and I'm always right, because my mother-in-law doesn't do like Peter's mother-in-law. But for whatever reason it is. And then Galatians 5:22 and 23, it talks about the fruits of the Spirit. And it says the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And I just want to say this. When we get to that place where we stand before Jesus, like he talks about in Matthew 28, we stand before Jesus, he's not going to put us through a theology test. He's not going to say, Stacy, how many Bible verses do you know? He's not going to say, Pee-wee, sing me some of those hymns. He's not going to say, Gary, how many times have you missed church? No. He's not going to say any of that stuff. I mean, for some of us, it would be better if it was a theology test, but it's not going to be. But what he's going to do, he's going to say what he said in Matthew 25, 42 and 44. He says, for I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? And he will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. And I think a lot of times we're more focused on trying to make believers than develop disciples. Because we want people to believe like we do. We want people to think like we do. This is what I was taught since growing up, since I was 5 years old, and we try to do that. And we miss the picture. We're not called to make people believe like we do. We're called to develop disciples. But often we reduce Christianity to the doctrinal statement. And what I believe that Jesus is doing is that he has invited you and I to a revolution of God's love. Because see, you can believe stuff and show no love. You can believe something all day long that don't mean you're applying it. And I just say, you can give money in the offering plate at the church and still not have love and show love. You can pay all the church's bills, and we're not against that. But I would rather you demonstrate Jesus' love. I'd rather you take that money back out of that offering plate if the only reason that you did that is for a status thing. But instead of putting money in that offering plate, you made that decision that everybody I encounter, I'm going to show Jesus' love. See, we get so caught up in these things that really don't matter. So, this is my attempt to make this kind of a Christmas type message. And you're going to like this. I know you are. And because you love Christmas. So, ever since I can remember in the church, there's been this big debate. Because every now and then you will see somebody, instead of saying Christmas, they will say Xmas. And since I was growing up, I remember the church, people in the church saying, we got to put Christ back in Christmas. No X. And we focus on this X. And we got a slide of an X that's not on the screen. There it is. I wish we sometimes we get so focused on this X. I wish we'd get focused on the people that have needs and showing the love of Jesus as passionate as we get about an X. Now here's the thing about the X. I decided I want to learn a little bit about this X so I can find out. And I was a little surprised. Because a lot of times it's like, they're trying to erase Jesus from the holiday. That's why they have the X. Not exactly. Little history lesson here. The X in Xmas, it goes back to like 4th century. Like it goes back, way back. Because see, the Greek letter chi is an X. And that letter is the first letter in the Greek word for Christ. Was that like pina coladas? Okay. If it was the pina colada song, I was going to have you go ahead and play that. So this is the word. This is Christos in Greek. What's the first letter in that? An X. So it's really like a sacred abbreviation, right? Ms. Violet, you seem a little lost, so I'm just going to put it this way. It's kind of like a sacred emoji, a Jesus emoji. Is kind of what that X is. That right there, yeah, that's for you, Violet. Jesus emoji. I know you love emojis. But we get so focused, we got to put Christ back in Christmas, and we think we do that by taking an X out. No. We do that by feeding the hungry. We do that by comforting the afflicted. We do that by loving the outcast. We do that by forgiving the wrongdoer. We do that by inspiring the hopeless. And I'm just going to say, as one of your pastors, I kind of feel like Fairlawn is called to be a part of this revolution of God's love. And see, I grew up in Fort Pierce. And I love Fort Pierce. I love this city. And I used to get so aggravated and so upset when somebody would talk about Fort Pierce, because I was like, I got to be the defender of Fort Pierce. They're like, what you need to do is move to Port St. Lucie. What you need to do is get out of here before I kick your butt. They're like, where am I going to move to? Zero Beach? Come on. And I used to I really would get angry. I would get upset when people would talk about Fort Pierce. But then I realized this, that there was another town with a bad reputation. That's what I get for saying that people fall asleep during Pastor Mark's message. Pastor Mark probably slipped them somas or something. But see, in the Bible, there's another town. There's a town that has a bad reputation. You could kind of say it's maybe like the Fort Pierce of the Bible. It's a town that Jesus was from called Nazareth. Because we find in John chapter 1, verse 46, when Philip meets Jesus, he gets all excited and he goes to Nathanael and he says, Nathanael, you got to come check this guy out. And Nathanael's response is, in John chapter 1, verse 46, he said, can anything good come out of Nazareth? And maybe you've been around people, or maybe you're thinking, can anything good come out of Fort Pierce? And they said, my comment to that is yes, you. You're like, I don't live in Fort Pierce. Well, you're in Fort Pierce right now. Just hate to tell you. But we're supposed to be the hands and feet of Jesus. We're supposed to be that extension of Jesus. We're supposed to be showing the love of Jesus. So when people encounter us, are they left with that fragrance of Jesus, or are they left knowing what we're against? Knowing what we're fighting against, knowing what we don't like. Or are they left feeling that love of Jesus? So my friends and family of Fairlawn Church, may you join the revolution of God's love. May you see the dignity in every person and carry the good news of love and hope wherever you go. And may we all be known for our love. Grace and peace. I love you.